They gave me a bunk in the aft observation ring and a laminated card that listed the emergency procedures in 7 languages, none of which were any use if the field misfired at full extension. I was not military. I held no rank. The Defense Authority had attached me to the Pale Axiom's trial crew because I had spent 11 years cataloging alien signal geometries. And the ship's mission brief included, in small print, a line about potential contact protocols in the event of encounter. I assumed that line was boilerplate. I assumed a great many things on the outbound leg. The Pale Axiom did not look like a warship. She was asymmetric. A long port spine, a cluster of fold array housings along the dorsal ridge that made her profile read on sensors as a debris, tumble rather than a crude hull. The design was intentional. The fold field, when active, bent the local spacetime gradient just enough that conventional mass detection returned noise. Any watching eye in the dead binary system at the edge of mapped space, we were nothing. A ghost. A patch of interference where there should have been vacuum. Commander Ruth did not use the word ghost. She used the word invisible, and she used it the way a person uses a word when they want you to understand they mean it exactly. We were 6 days into the diagnostic run. The fold field team had been cycling the array through graduated extensions since 0400, and I had been watching the geometry readouts from a secondary console in the observation ring because no one had told me I was not allowed to. The data was extraordinary. Each extension bent the local metric by a calculable increment and snapped back clean. No drift, no bleed, no secondary resonance. The team was satisfied. The lead engineer, a compact man named Ozil, had begun using the word elegant, which among engineers is the closest thing to a declaration of love. At 11:17 ship time, during a full field extension at 92% of rated depth, the geometry readouts stopped matching the array's output. Noticed it before the console did. The numbers diverged, not by much. Perhaps 3 decimal places across 4 of the 14 monitored coordinates. But in xenolinguistics, you develop a sensitivity to pattern breaks that most people would call paranoia. I called the observation ring's intercom and said, very carefully, that I thought someone should look at the lateral geometry feed. Ozil looked. He did not say elegant. The divergence was not instrument error. It was not bleed from the Axiom's own field. Something in the surrounding spacetime was responding. Something was answering the fold's geometry with a fold of its own, faint, precise, and coming from a direction that had shown empty on every sensor pass for 6 days. The commander was on the bridge in under 3 minutes. I was not asked to leave, which I think was an oversight. What came next I have tried to describe in formal terms for 3 separate review boards, and I have never felt that formal terms were adequate. At 11:34, a seam appeared in space 20 meters off the port bow. Not a crack, not a rupture, a seam. The way fabric has a seam, a line where 2 edges of something have been brought together and laid flat. It was visible to the naked eye through the observation port as a faint distortion, a shivering of starlight along a line perhaps 40 meters long. Behind it, if behind is even the correct word, there was depth. A geometry that did not match the 3-dimensional space it occupied. The Verath Continuance did not fly to us. They folded local space and stepped through the result. Their vessel, if vessel is the correct word, was a sustained distortion. It held a shape the way a whirlpool holds a shape. Not because it was built that way, but because the forces sustaining it were in balance. It had no hull. It had no running lights. It had a presence that the Axiom's instruments registered as a mass anomaly, approximately 60 meters across, and it sat 20 meters off our port bow and did nothing for 4 seconds. Then our fold field changed. I felt it in the deck. A hum that I had been hearing for 6 days as a background constant shifted in pitch by a fraction, and the geometry readouts on my secondary console lit up with values I had no framework to interpret. Ozil later told me that the Verath had reached into the Axiom's fold field with their own and interlocked the 2 geometries, the way 2 gears mesh. We were locked together in a shared bubble of warped space. Neither of us could disengage without the cooperation of the other. We were, in the most precise sense, held. Commander Ruth did not fire. She did not raise shields. She said on the bridge channel, in a voice that I would describe as professionally level, "All stations hold," and we held. I watched the geometry feed for 11 minutes. I am a xenolinguist. I am trained to look for the structure in signal, to find the intent underneath the pattern. What I watched for 11 minutes was the Verath studying the Axiom's fold field geometry in the way a scholar studies a text. Systematically, carefully, without urgency. They ran comparisons. Their own distortion vessel shifted its internal geometry incrementally, as if testing values. They were not threatening us. They were reading us. What they were reading was this. The Pale Axiom's fold array had been built by human engineers working from first principles. Over 40 years of theoretical physics and 17 of applied testing, with no knowledge that anyone else in the galaxy had ever approached the same problem. The Verath Continuance had built their civilization on fold geometry across a span of time that, in the review materials I was later cleared to see, the Defense Authority estimated at between 4,000 and 8,000 years. They had assumed, in the way that very old and very capable civilizations sometimes assume things, that the geometry of space was their particular inheritance, that the knowledge was theirs in the way that a language is a people's, not because they invented physics, because no one else had ever found their way to it. 40 years. The Verath held their position for 11 minutes and 14 seconds. Then the seam reopened, the interlocked geometry disengaged cleanly, and the distortion vessel was gone. The starlight stopped shivering. The Axiom's fold field returned to nominal. The geometry readout settled. Commander Ruth said, "Log it and then, Stern. I need a written summary in 2 hours." I wrote 4 drafts. The 4th one was the one I filed. In the margin of my personal copy, the one that was never submitted to any board, I wrote a single line. Once a thing is truly seen, it cannot be unseen. I wrote it because I had spent 11 minutes watching the Verath reach into our fold field, and I had understood, by the end of those 11 minutes, that what they found there had changed something in them the way irreversible things change. Not badly, not in the moment dangerously. The Continuance filed their encounter record as benign. The Defense Authority reviewed the geometry data for 3 months and declared the event a successful first contact, no shots fired, no demands, no breach of any protocol. 91 days after the Pale Axiom returned to Terran space, a Verath distortion form, approximately twice the size of the one we had met, appeared inside the atmosphere of a frontier colony called Veth's Landing, on a world that had been settled for 11 years and housed 43,000 people. It did not identify itself. It did not use any fold geometry consistent with the Continuance's known signature. It used a variant that the xenophysics team later identified as a dissident branch, a faction inside the Continuance who believed that the fold geometry was not knowledge to be encountered in another species, who believed that the correct response to finding a second intelligence at the threshold of their inheritance was not observation. I was in a Defense Authority briefing room when the colony's distress signal reached the relay. I remember the sound the room made, or rather, the sound it did not make, that half-second of nothing before anyone spoke. I remember thinking about the seam in space off the port bow, about 11 minutes of silence while something ancient and precise looked at what we had built. True recognition, when it comes, cannot be called back. The Continuance knew what we were now. So did the faction that did not want them to know. We were 40 years behind them, and we had gotten there anyway. There is no file they have, no record that prepared them for what that means. They built their understanding of the universe's geometry over millennia. We arrived at the same door in a single human lifetime. I do not know what happens next. I know what we sent to Veth's Landing when the signal came through. I know the class of ship, and I know the standing orders the commander carried. I know the Defense Authority did not deliberate long. The Verath dissident faction, it turns out, was not the only one that had been paying attention.